Alexander the Great, is known best for his military genius and his diplomatic skills in handling the various populaces of the regions he conquered. He is further recognized for spreading Greek culture from Greece throughout Asia Minor, Egypt, and Mesopotamia to India, and thus initiating the era of the Hellenistic period, 323 to 31 BCE, during which 4 of his generals known as the Diadochi, in between their wars for supremacy, continued his policies of integrating Greek culture with that of the Near East. He died in 323 BCE without clearly naming a successor, or, according to some accounts, his choice of the commander Perdiccas was ignored, and the empire he built was divided among the Diadochi. Without a chosen successor, there was almost immediately a dispute among Alexander's generals as to who his successor should be. The Diadochi were the rival generals, families, and friends of Alexander the Great, who fought for control over his empire after his death. The Wars of the Diadochi mark the beginning of the Hellenistic period from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River Valley. The Wars of the Diadochi were a series of conflicts, fought between 322 and 275 BCE. The Diadochi fought over and carved up Alexander's empire into several kingdoms after his death, a legacy which reigned on and continued the influence of ancient Greek culture abroad for over 300 more years. The 5 kingdoms of the Diadochi were Kingdom of Ptolemy I Soter, Kingdom of Cassander, Kingdom of Lysimachus, Kingdom of Seleucus I Nicator and Epirus. Meleager and the infantry supported the candidacy of Alexander's half-brother, Aridaeus, while Perdiccas, the leading cavalry commander, supported waiting until the birth of Alexander's unborn child by Roxana. Later a compromise was arranged. Aridaeus should become king and should rule jointly with Roxana's child Alexander IV. Perdiccas himself would become regent of the entire empire, and Meleager his lieutenant. However, Perdiccas had Meleager and the other infantry leaders murdered, and assumed full control. The other cavalry generals who had supported Perdiccas were rewarded in the partition of Babylon by becoming satraps of the various parts of the empire. Macedon and the rest of Greece were to be under the joint rule of Antipater, who had governed them for Alexander, and Craterus, Alexander's most able lieutenant, while Alexander's old secretary, Eumenes of Cardia, was to receive Cappadocia and Paphlagonia. Meanwhile, the news of Alexander's death had inspired a revolt in Greece, known as the Lamian War. Athens and other cities joined together, ultimately besieging Antipater in the fortress of Lamia. Antipater was relieved by a force sent by Leonidas, who was killed in action, but the war did not come to an end until Craterus's arrival with a fleet to defeat the Athenians at the Battle of Cranon on September 5, 322 BCE. For a time, this brought an end to any resistance to Macedonian domination. Meanwhile, Python suppressed a revolt of Greek settlers in the eastern parts of the empire, and Perdiccas and Eumenes subdued Cappadocia. In 310 BCE, Cassander secretly murdered Alexander IV and Roxana. The Battle of Ipsus at the end of the Fourth War of the Diadochi finalized the breakup of the unified empire of Alexander. Antigonus I and his son Demetrius I of Macedon were pitted against the coalition of 3 other companions of Alexander: Cassander, ruler of Macedon; Lysimachus, ruler of Thrace; and Seleucus I Nicator, ruler of Babylonia and Persia. Antigonus was killed, but his son Demetrius took a large part of Macedonia and continued his father's dynasty. After the death of Cassander and Lysimachus, following one another in fairly rapid succession, the Ptolemies and Seleucids controlled the vast majority of Alexander's former empire, with a much smaller segment controlled by the Antigonid dynasty until the 1st century. This division was to last for a century, before the Antigonid kingdom finally fell to Rome, and the Seleucids were harried from Persia by the Parthians and forced by the Romans to relinquish control in Asia Minor. A rump Seleucid kingdom survived in Syria until finally conquered by Pompey in 64 BCE. The Ptolemies lasted longer in Alexandria under Rome, and Egypt was finally annexed into Rome in 30 BCE.